Pastor Blythe asked me to give a history of Veterans Day and to kind of gave me quite a bit of leeway, actually, to go after that. And so I kind of decided that after looking at the history of Veterans Day and how it differs from the Memorial Day, I'd also look at certain important individuals in American history who were veterans, specifically presidents. So, first of all, there is quite a bit of confusion about Memorial Day and Veterans Day. So, Memorial Day is a celebration of remembrance for those who passed away in the U.S. military. And it was first started after the U.S. Civil War, and it's often associated with Arlington Cemetery because that's where the president does it every single year. He goes and lays wreaths on the tomb of them. Brain fart, I apologize. Nonetheless, just an interesting little fact about Arlington Cemetery is that that was the plantation of Robert E. Lee before the Civil War, and it was taken over and used as the headquarters of the Union military during the Civil War. And when the Union commander at Arlington was at Robert E. Lee's plantation was asked to dedicate a piece of land to a new national cemetery, he chose Robert E. Lee's plantation. So that if he ever tried to go back and live in that house after the war, he would have to look at the men who the Union commander felt was dead because of him. Veterans Day, however, is a celebration of the men and women who have died and who still live, who served in the U.S. military, the past and the present. It was actually originally called Armistice Day, and it was dedicated celebrated first in 1919 to celebrate the end of World War I. It is celebrated on November 11th, and Eisenhower was the one who actually changed it from Armistice Day, which was a celebration specifically of World War I, to Veterans Day to celebrate all veterans of all U.S. wars. But importantly, I think veterans have a very key understanding of what makes America, America, because they've sacrificed for our freedom. And so it's no wonder that the best presidents in U.S. history happen to be veterans of the United States military. Starting with the first president of the United States, George Washington. He was the commanding officer of the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. But he actually originally started out as an officer in the British colonial militia, but nonetheless, he's also the only U.S. president, while he was president, to command a militia force, or an army unit, in the Whiskey Rebellion, which was a rebellion of people who made whiskey, because we were taxing them a little bit too much. You can thank Alexander Hamilton for that. And so after that, there's Abraham Lincoln. And yes, he was in fact a veteran. He was not a veteran of the front lines. He did not serve in battle. But he enlisted for 3 months in the Illinois militia during the Black Hawk War. He enlisted specifically for the war. He was intending to serve on the front lines. But the Black Hawk War only lasted for 4 months. It was against several Native American tribes who had moved into Illinois and started attacking settlers and things like that. Nonetheless, when speaking of his military career, when he was running for the House of Representatives, Lincoln was less than grandiose about it. He's quoted as saying, "I fought, bled, and came away. I had a good many bloody struggles with the mosquitoes." And so, however, a keynote is that when he joined, he enlisted as a private in this Illinois militia company. But back then, they elected their own commanders, and he got himself elected as the commander of his company, showing the qualities of a leader all the way before, decades before the Civil War and before he became a president. After that, I would like to point out Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt. Before the Spanish-American War of 1898, he was actually the Secretary of the Navy. He was a very powerful man. Very powerful, wealthy. He had no need to put himself on the front lines during the Spanish-American War. But he resigned from his position as the Secretary of Navy as soon as the war started, and he asked to form his own regiment in order to fight the Spanish in Cuba. These are known as the Rough Riders. Now, he received 23,000 people asking to join his regiment. People from all classes, wealthy, poor, those who were middle class. He received Native Americans, African Americans, Irish, German, people of all different walks of life. People who were educated, uneducated, didn't matter. And he allowed many of them to join. He went to Cuba fighting with Native Americans, African Americans, Irish Americans, German Americans, wealthy and poor. And he is also the only U.S. president to receive the Medal of Honor for his gallantry at the Battle of San Juan Hill. Actually, hills, because there's multiple hills, but San Juan Hill in Cuba. After that, I would like to point out Truman. Harry S. Truman was a Democrat, but nonetheless. Don't worry, I'm not going to get political. Anyways, but Truman was a veteran of World War I, and he did serve on the front lines as an officer in World War I. And he stated saying that my whole political career is based on my war service. So he's using his experiences and his training as a soldier to guide his political decisions, and that's important. When he became president, it was after FDR passed away. He died in 1945, I believe. And so President Truman got 4 years, full 4 years, essentially, to be president because he was his vice president. But he had the very difficult decision to make. Do I drop the atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, or do I not? Well, his experiences in World War I made it to where he had to choose to drop them. Because the amount of American lives, of American servicemen who would have died launching a naval invasion of Japan, who had prepared 3 million men and women to defend the island to the death, would have been astronomical. Recently, I opened up my computer just this morning. If anyone's ever heard of the 1619 Project, it's a historical project that's trying to rewrite history. And as a history major, I don't like that very much. The 1619 Project's creator, Nicole Hannah-Jones, recently visited Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and she said she felt shame that we dropped the atomic bombs on Japan. Question I asked her is, if she was President of the United States at that point, and she had served in World War I and saw the horrors of war firsthand, would she not have made the exact same decision? Knowing that she was putting the lives of millions of Americans and Japanese, and not just Americans, Canadians, Australians, British, and Soviet Union, of course, lives at risk, would she have not made that same decision? I believe she would have. But unfortunately, she doesn't have that experience. Instead, she decides to call us shameful and blame us for that decision. Next on my list is John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Now, he is the only U.S. president to receive a Purple Heart. And he received the Purple Heart in the Pacific Theater of World War II. When asked how he became a hero, JFK is quoted as responding, "It was involuntarily. They sunk my boat." And then the final U.S. president that I'd like to cover is one I think does not get enough respect because his administration was full of corruption. He wasn't himself corrupt, but it was full of corruption. He's known as a drunkard, as a brutal butcher and murderer by many, but that's Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant, to me, after Abraham Lincoln, is the greatest U.S. president in American history. Ulysses S. Grant won the Civil War for the Union. No other man could have done it except for Ulysses S. Grant. Why is this? Well, I mean, we went through about 20 different generals commanding the Army of the Potomac and the armies during the Civil War, and none of them did it. But it was because Ulysses S. Grant understood one thing, and that was how to use the Union strengths to overwhelm the South's strengths. They had very good commanders, very loyal soldiers. We had men and material. And so that's all well and good, and that's really, really good. His military career is above reproach. He did his best for his men. He won the war for us. But his presidency does not get the respect it deserves because of the aforementioned, previously mentioned corruption. However, he is the U.S. president that allowed for 20 years after the Civil War for African Americans to participate in our political system across the whole nation. Many of the southern states elected African American representatives, African American senators, governors, local legislators, mayors. It was because of his protection. He made sure that all men and women were treated equally. And only he did that. After him, it changed. After him, they stopped doing that. Why? Because he saw firsthand what we were fighting for in the Civil War. And he made sure that what we were fighting for was fulfilled during his presidency. After that, though, men who did not fight in the war, men who did not see firsthand the sacrifices of the Civil War, they lost the message. And they did not continue the promises of Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant and the promises of our Constitution to these men and women who were American. However, it got me asking a question when I was researching American history on this subject, and that was, how exactly does God feel about soldiers, about veterans, and about leaders? Well, it's very clear throughout the Bible how he feels about them. Think about the man after God's own heart, King David. Not only was he a leader, but before he was a leader, he was a soldier in God's army, and he fought time and again for the Lord. And he was the man after God's own heart. And then also think about the centurion in the New Testament. I would like to turn to Luke 7:1. I have it marked somewhere. Here it is. Now when he had ended all his sayings in the audience of the people, he entered into Capernaum. And a certain centurion's servant, who was dear unto him, was sick and near ready to die. And when he heard of Jesus, he sent unto him and the elders of the Jews, beseeching him that he would come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they besought him instantly, saying that he was worthy for whom he should do this, for he loveth our nation, and he hath built us a synagogue. Then Jesus went with them, and when he was now not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying unto him, Lord, trouble not thyself, for I am not worthy that thou should enter my roof. Wherefore neither thou I am myself worthy to come unto thee, but say in a word, and my servant shall be healed. For I also am a man set under authority, having under me soldiers, and I say unto one, Go, and he goeth, and to another, Come, and he cometh, and to my servant, Do this, and he doeth. When Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him, and turned him about, and said unto the people that followed him, I say unto you, I have not found so great a faith, no, not in Israel. That is a very powerful statement right there. First of all, he's a Gentile. He's not a Jew, the centurion. And he has more faith than any of the Jews or Gentiles or Samaritans in the Holy Land. More faith than any of them. But also, when you think about it, I lost a page. Hold on a second. Here it is. When you think about it, look at that connection back in Luke 8. He's saying that his experiences, his training in the Roman military is the direct reason for his faith in Jesus. Because he recognizes the authority of God in Jesus. And he recognizes that with that authority, things will be done. That's where his faith is coming from. It's coming from his experiences in the Roman military. So the man with more faith than all of the people in Israel, and the man after God's own heart, were veterans. They were soldiers. Why is this important to God? There are many qualities that make a good soldier. There are way too many to list. But I believe key among them are loyalty, obedience, and fortitude, or perseverance. These qualities we can see mentioned many times throughout the Bible. Loyalty in Isaiah 44:6. Thus saith the Lord, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts, I am the first and I am the last, and beside me there is no God. We're not to put any other God up near him. We're to be loyal only to God. That's it. Only him. And I would like to go one step farther. Only to him, even and especially above worldly ideologies and worldly things. And then also Exodus 23. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Very small verse, but powerful nonetheless. So we have to be loyal to God. That's important. Now, obedience. Romans 5:19. For as by one man's disobedience many were made sinners, so by the obedience of one shall many be made righteous. And fortitude. 1 Peter 3:14. But, and if ye suffer for righteousness' sake, happy are ye, and be not afraid of their terror, neither be troubled. And finally, 1 Peter 4:1. For as much then as Christ has suffered for us in flesh, arm yourselves likewise with the same mind. For he that has suffered in the flesh hath ceased from sin. In other words, these three qualities that are present in a good soldier are qualities that must be present in a good Christian. And these are also qualities that Jesus himself exemplified perfectly. In Romans 5:19, Jesus shows that he's loyal to God and to humanity. And I mention humanity because it's really his loyalty. He didn't have to come down here and do it just for God. He was doing it for us. His loyalty to us, his love for us, made him to make that sacrifice. He's obedient to the Lord, and he fulfills the Lord's plan accordingly. And finally, he suffered. He endured greatly to relieve us of our sin. So loyalty, obedience, and fortitude are qualities present in veterans of the past, in ancient times, such as King David, in more modern times, such as the centurion, and even now in the United States military, and in our history. Two little stories about these is, when you think about obedience, I'm not talking about blind obedience or blind loyalty. Those are not good qualities. An example I'll use, of course, is, has anyone ever heard of the 442nd Regiment during World War II in Europe? Show of hands? Heard of it. Okay. It was an all-Japanese regiment that was formed in 1944, and it was sent to Europe to fight Italy and Nazi Germany. This division, to say the least, was put through hell. Because they were Japanese Americans, they were put and sent to places that were the worst parts of the front line. And they were sent to do missions that they would not send any other division to do, or regiment to do. Did they revolt? Did they say no? No. They went and they fulfilled their mission. They suffered many casualties, but they are the most decorated regiment of World War II for the United States military. And so, with that example, we see obedience and loyalty of the U.S. servicemen during World War II. Another example in U.S. history would be Lawrence Chamberlain at the Battle of Gettysburg. And this is a twofold obedience and loyalty. First of all, as an officer, Lawrence Chamberlain was ordered by his commanding officer to hold that ridge. He had to hold it. Second off, his soldiers that were under his command had to follow his orders. So there's two different ways in which things could have happened. Lawrence Chamberlain could have disobeyed his commanding officer's order and pulled his men out of there, or his soldiers could have revolted against him and fled. Neither of those happened. Even when they ran out of ammunition, even when they had almost no more means to fight, what did they do? Well, put your bayonets on your rifle and charge down that hill at the Confederates. And that's exactly what they did. And that's obedience and loyalty. That is, and perseverance in that instant, because they were constantly under attack at that point. However, not all obedience and not all loyalty is necessarily good. If we would turn to 1 Samuel 22:16, we can see a good example, a good biblical example of obedient, loyal soldiers. And the king said, "Thou shalt surely die, Ahimelech thou, and all thy father's house." And the king said unto the footmen that stood around him, about him, "Turn and slay the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew when he fled, and did not shew it to me. But the servants of the king would not put forth their hand to fall upon the priests of the Lord." That right there. These soldiers who were under King Saul refused to follow that order. And that's not out of disobedience. That's not out of disloyalty. That's out of obedience and loyalty to a higher power. They were not going to slay the priests of the Lord based on some earthly king's orders. And the king said to Doeg, "Turn thou and fall upon the priests." And Doeg the Edomite turned, and he fell upon the priests, and slew on that day 85 persons that did wear the linen ephod. And Nob, the city of priests, smote he with the edge of the sword, both men and women, children and suckling, and oxen and asses, and sheep with the edge of the sword. Notice it does not say that King Saul's men, the army of Israel, did this. It was specifically Doeg the Edomite. And Doeg the Edomite is known throughout the Bible as being a very unholy man, not being a very good man. And he was not a soldier either. But there's another part of that story that is important. You have the actual soldiers of King Saul, and they refused to follow a horrible order that was against God. But then you also have the spiritual soldiers of the Lord, the priests. The priests could have easily given David away. They could have easily acquiesced to the king's demands, but they refused to. And they were slain, just like that. And the entire city of priests was destroyed. So what we have is a good example of both actual soldiers who are obeying God and spiritual soldiers of the Lord refusing to disobey him and remaining loyal to him, even by losing their life. Finally, I'd like to turn to two spiritual soldiers in American history. And those would be Martin Luther King Jr. and John Brown. Now, does anyone here know who John Brown is in history? Raise a hand.
He was a black person.
No, it wasn't a black person.
Oh, okay.
Okay, he was a white man, but more importantly, he was a Christian. He was a very strong believer in God, and he believed that slavery was a sin. Slavery was unacceptable in a nation that claimed to be Christian. And so he made it his work of life and his devotion to God that he would defeat slavery in the United States. He was a failure in business, in farms. All of his investments fell through. But one day, when his pastor said that this church had to come to a decision on slavery, he stood up and he dedicated his life to the abolition of it. He fought in Kansas with his sons, Bleeding Kansas as it's known, when they were debating whether or not to have slavery all the way up there. And then finally he gave his life. He tried to initiate a slave rebellion in Virginia in 1860, 1 year before the Civil War. So he initiated something, but it wasn't quite what he wanted. But he frightened old Virginia through and through. It was actually Robert E. Lee, while he was still a member of the United States military, that put him down. But there was a song written after his death, when he was sentenced to death for that rebellion, called John Brown's Body Lies a Mouldering in the Grave. It's the basis of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And one of the lines in it always strikes me as being very powerful. He's gone to be a soldier in the army of the Lord. Think about that. He's gone to be a soldier in the army of the Lord. I think that as Christians, we should all seek to have this said after we pass about us. We've gone to be a soldier in the army of the Lord. Don't be a Christian that, yes, I'm a Christian, but, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to tell people about it. I'm not going to fight for my Christianity. Don't do that. Look at China. Every single person that China executes that are Christian, for their faith, they're going on to be a soldier in the army of the Lord. They are. Because they are losing their lives. They are sacrificing their lives for God. And it's working. People are turning to Christianity in droves in China. We need that here. Regardless of the repercussions, stand up for your faith. Stand up for God. And you will be a soldier in the army of the Lord.